Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thanks for joining today. I would say let's give it another minute or two. See if someone else is going to join, and then we can start. Okay, let me share. Screen. Feel free to add yourself to the participant list. People can hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Sorry. I think my laptop feels the heat as well. It's running very slow. Okay,
Actual temperature?
It's not so terrible. It's 31. But I guess living in the northern part of Europe for many years, now 31 feels to me like it's terribly hot.
Yeah, that I would also agree on.
How's it for you?
We only have like 22, 23 here. So it's pretty nice.
Huh.
I can't complain.
I wish I could find my Zoom window somewhere. My laptop is not interested. Okay. Right. So welcome everyone, and I think welcome Shruti. Yes, I hope I pronounce it correctly.
Yeah.
I think you're new to this working group.
And I'm really excited to be here and look at all this work and hear from all of you guys. So thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that. I don't know if it's my laptop or if it's.
I think it's your laptop, and it came out fine on our end.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry about that. So would you like to introduce yourself, or you just did?
Yes, I go ahead. Do you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear. Okay, now sorry about that.
No, you're fine. So yes, I am Shruti, and I'm working alongside Nkara and also other members of the CDF Jenkins community to design the Cloud Events plugin for Jenkins. And as you said, this is my first time attending the Cloud Events SIG meeting or the Event SIG meeting. And I'm really excited to look at all of the work. And I also do have some questions if you do have time to take them on design patterns and just cloud events and working with them in general.
Sure, absolutely. I think we have a relatively lightweight agenda for today, so I think definitely we have time. Okay, then welcome again, and let's get started. I think first thing in the agenda is to review the action items from last week. We had a couple of those. First one, Eric, to make a PR about what is a change.
Yes, so I've created a PR earlier today. I do have a question on that, but maybe we can have that at the last bullet, the PR design discussions there. So, but yeah, it's ongoing.
Great. Thanks for that. So I'll add it to the PR discussion at the end. And the second action item was for me to make a PR about lightweight versus heavyweight, which I did. I also created a PR. Sorry, my laptop is not responding to me. So sorry. Okay. So I'll just open this quickly. I believe it's still open. Oh no, it has been merged already. Okay, great. So no discussion on that. In terms of SIG Events update, which is the next item on the agenda, I don't have any specific update. So does anyone have anything they would like to bring up in terms of activities or updates for the SIG events?
No, you got me confused. Isn't the SIG events that we're on?
Yes. Yes. That was just any update worth mentioning in this. I don't think there is anything specific to mention. Just a reminder maybe that then during the summer we'll just have two meetings. One is today and the next one is in August. Okay. And then, so for the workstream updates, we had a workstream meeting last Tuesday, I believe, and we had updates on the status of the POC. So I think I demonstrated the current status of the POC, what we have working today between Tecton and Captain. Can provide a quick update if my laptop. Yes. Okay, so this is the current setup of the demo of the POC, how it works today. So we have Tecton and Captain running in the demo cluster. We have a Cloud Events broker installed that is served by Knative serving, and we have an application called Cloud Events Player, which is connected to the broker as well, and it allows to visualize all the cloud events that are going through the broker. And we have a sequence configured on Captain's side with a manual approval as well. So the way the demo runs is Tecton starts a build of a simple demo application. Once the build is finished, this is notified to Captain through events. Captain starts running its sequence, so it waits for approval, and once the approval is done, again sends cloud events, which are picked up by Tecton. Tecton runs the deployment, and once the deployment is done, it goes back again to Captain, and Captain marks the sequence as completed successfully. And then in the cloud event player, you can see the events that were exchanged. And in the kind of orange boxes in here, you can see the custom components that we developed for this POC. So on Tecton side, we have a Tecton Cloud Events controller, which sends cloud events in the format specified by us. And then for Captain, we have an inbound translation layer and an outbound translation layer. So that all the events that go for the broker are events in the CD event format. And then there is the translation happening between these. Okay. Any question on the POC?
That looks really amazing, Andrea. And so we were just talking about an architecture which looks similar for Jenkins, and just in an interoperable system with Jenkins and any number of CI/CD tools, or whichever tools which are in the cloud events or emitting or consuming cloud events compliancing. So when I'm looking at Knative, and again, a very interesting architecture for the cloud events broker. So is the cloud events, the broker architecture, so is the cloud events broker just listening to all of the cloud events which are coming in from Tecton and Captain? Or is it only listening to a certain kinds of events which a user might be able to filter out in a way?
Right, so the cloud event broker itself, it's a sink. It exposes an URL where you can send events to. So it's up to the client what to send. In this demo, the client sends everything. And then the trigger is where the filtering happens. So the trigger is kind of a subscription. It's a CRD, so you can create a resource, and in the resource you can define what kind of events you want to filter. So what kind of events you want to receive. And yeah, so basically for Tecton triggers, I can say I want to receive this kind of events, and same for the Captain inbound. And in case of the cloud events player, we have a trigger that is basically a catch-all, so that you get all the events visualized in here.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But I guess you can generate.
Sorry, go ahead.
I guess you can generally say that it's up to the listener to filter. So the cloud broker, the events broker will send all events, and then you as a client have to listen in and filter the events you're interested in. That's like a general idea.
Yes, even though the trigger really allows you to kind of delegate that responsibility to the trigger controller. So the client application itself does not need to have the ability to do the filtering. It can just configure a trigger in your cluster, and then it will only receive the events that it's interested in. So yeah, so that kind of filtering functionality is provided by Kennedy eventing this setup.
I was also thinking about a way that you said this is between Tecton and Captain, but a way where all of the services which are so specifically for Jenkins is saying all of the services above as the publisher as a black box. So anything can be emitting, or any service really, Tecton or Captain, Knative, or any service which is emitting cloud events, and Jenkins consuming it. So a way to listen for events coming in from different, obviously, sources. And also, there was a conversation similar to this on the Slack channel for Events SIG about the payload looking very different for each cloud events which is emitted. So that is one thing that we've been thinking about of implementing is the event. We do want to give users the way to filter events based on the event metadata. But for example, we want to trigger a job inside of Jenkins, and let's say that the job needs to have an X name, and this name is basically coming in from an external source. So inside of the event. So just how has been implementing or parsing through different data for all different kinds of sources, because Tecton has a very different way that Tecton emits events, and then also one is using binary format, the other is using a structured format. So if an event value, if like a metadata or just data that we need from the event body is present inside of an object, just parsing through it in again like an agnostic manner, so we don't really know about the source. Just curious if you guys have any idea on that.
Right, I think what we are trying to achieve is for the different kind of events to identify at least common type of data, and then it would be responsibility of the generating platform to fill that data in. So if we see that, for instance, when you build an artifact, you have a name and a version, which are common fields. So we define those as part of the shared vocabulary. And then it's responsibility of the platform that generates those events to fill valid values in. We don't have yet like an extensibility mechanism, but it's something that we'll need. So we'll need a way for the platform to say, okay, we have this part of this, the payload where different platform can put extra data, and maybe a way for them to describe it, so that you may take it from there. So right now in the POC, it's a bit stitched up, with there are some bits of information the Captain needs, and those are into the payload of the event generated by Captain, or well, they are originally into some headers, and then they're picked up and put into the payload, and then Tecton puts them back into the payload and they're picked up again. But that's kind of custom logic, and the idea is to reduce that to a minimum. Yeah, but I think we still have a lot of work to do in that direction. I don't know if this answers your question.
Yes, that does make a lot of sense. And the trigger for this particular POC, I would say, is filtering events based on the event metadata, right? So if we have cloud events, usually like C type, source, over also just filtering out based on the event body.
So the filtering, okay, let me go back. So the filtering that is done by Knative, it happens only for headers. And what Knative supports is just full match. So it's important to, if you want to, if you have a field where you want to filter on, to make it as less dynamic as possible, so that it's possible to filter upon it. So typically you can filter on things like event type, source, and then within the application, so like in the adapter, in the Captain inbound, we can filter based on the content as well, because there you can then get the payload and have more sophisticated logic in there.
That sounds really great. And does this also support both the versions of cloud events? Because like Tecton and Captain uses different, if I'm right and if I remember correctly, Tecton and Captain are both using different formats for cloud events. I'm also guessing that setting up triggers also supports just setting up triggers for those different sort of cloud events, like a binary format and structured format.
Yeah, okay, so I think Captain natively has its own format of cloud events, and that's what this inbound and outbound components are responsible for doing translation between like the CD events into the Captain format when going in, and from Captain events to CD events when going out. It makes sense. I also have a sequence diagram that you can show it. Right.
So to make clear, on the event broker, it's only our own events, that is the CD events that's going. So we don't have any specific event there, but it's only the our events that are there.
Yes, that's correct.
With multiple different event types, by creating like a uniform protocol that you will use to communicate between. So if you'll be reading or parsing that event, you know how the event looks like and how you're going to do it. So you don't have to take care of several different version of events.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenge for this plugin, because we're trying to achieve interoperability in an indirect manner where we really, especially for Jenkins, it's the same, where we really don't want to define that it's only a certain kind of source which is emitting. So that's a bit of a challenge, thinking about the event metadata or the event data, and also the types of the formats of the events coming in from so many different varied and vivid systems. And this looks really interesting, and I think having that Knative broker and trigger as a way to filter out events based on the event metadata or the event just headers, I think that's a very interesting idea.
Something that I wanted to mention that might be relevant for Jenkins as well, because I think it's similar to Tekton in a way, is that while some systems have a concept of a deployment or a build or a remediation or like this kind of abstractions, Tekton only knows about tasks and pipelines. And you can see in the sequence diagram, when a pipeline is started, it sends a CD pipeline starts, and then, well, it's not marked here, it will also send a CD pipeline end. But in this POC, Tekton also sends a CD artifact packaged event. And the way we achieve that is by letting the author of the pipeline express that by decorating the pipeline definition. Let me show you how it looks like. And so if I look into Tekton resources and the pipelines, you can see that the build pipeline is an annotation, which is CD artifact packaged. And when that is enabled, it will send the specific event. And in Tekton, we built some logic so that it expects certain metadata to come from results. But you could use extra annotation to map, to tell Tekton where to get that information. So because the CD protocol expects to have an artifact ID, an artifact name, and an artifact version, so those must be kind of exposed as an output by the Tekton pipeline. So if these results are available and the annotation is there, then Tekton will also send this extra artifact. And it's a way for the pipeline author to say this pipeline also is a regular pipeline, but it's also responsible for creating this artifact, and this extra metadata allows Tekton to send the CD events for that kind of CD events as well. And similar in the deployment pipeline, there is a CD service deployed enabled annotation, and there is a set of results. Where are those? Yes, here, environment ID, service name, service version, which are required by our protocol. And these two, Captain context and Captain trigger ID, those are exposed because they are needed by Captain. And this is something that we had to do for the POC, but I think it would be nice to find a general way to carry this kind of context information without having to do one-to-one specific integration. But this is the problem we have not solved. I think actually putting the POC together maybe raise more questions, but I think it's good. If it raises the right question, then we can try to find solutions that are helpful.
And the YAML that you were showing about the pipelines. So all of the information that, for example, you have all of this information inside results. And so it's essentially a way of saying that all of this should be there. Is it like an and sort of a way of saying that each of them needs to be there? Or is it more like, even if, let's say, service name is absent, we will send this. Even if some information is null or just not present, we will send this. Or every time we are sending this kind of event, all this information needs to be there. And that's a way of standardizing whenever a sync is receiving this kind of event from Tekton, it exactly knows what it's getting.
I think we could support both cases. Right now, I think I for the POC probably are mandatory, but I think we have some cases already in the vocabulary where some of the fields are marked as optional. So it should be possible to have both cases, I think.
But I guess the idea with having mandatory is in order to enable us to process the events correctly. else we will not send it, because else it would be quite a hassle of knowing when you're receiving it if you don't have all the data how to handle the event. So that's why we're going to have some parts are going to be mandatory in order for enabling for us to route it and to handle it correctly.
Yes, indeed. So something we discussed during the meeting on Tuesday last week, I think, is if it'd be good to have these as kind of a framework and enable, switching components. So you could keep kind of the cloud events broker part and the view monitor measure block underneath. And then we could use this framework to show different integrations. So we could have a POC where we have, I don't know, Tecton, Captain, and Jenkins, or maybe Tecton and Jenkins, or Jenkins and Captain, and other projects as they want to get on board to make, to show more use cases and make this more compelling. So if you have any specific use case in mind that you think you would like to build a POC on between Jenkins and some other components or a collection of other components, that's definitely something that we can look into and collaborate on, I think.
Yeah, I think that sounds really interesting, because for now we have not explored the idea of having Knative as a way of serving as a middle between sending and receiving events. And I'd really like to see how Jenkins can work alongside Knative and also other tools to essentially have that pipeline running. So that's very, and also thank you so much for answering all of the questions.
Sure, no problem. And one of the main advantages for me of having the broker is that it allows to have multiple listeners to your events. And it basically, at the end of the day, allows me to have this view monitor measure block underneath. So you can have someone who listens to all the events, which means it will receive events from any platform on top that talks to the broker and that speaks CD events. And the hope is that by building this kind of shared semantic across different platforms, then you can build something maybe a bit more sophisticated than the cloud events player. Instead of just showing a list of events, you could show maybe a timeline with the what happened into your workflow. Maybe container image was built or deployed and rolled back. And then also you could have a storage where you put all your events data, and you can use that then to measure your DevOps performance. So you could know how many deployment you've done per day or per month. You can know how many rollback, how many remediation you had to enact, and so forth.
The vocabulary, or just standardizing a way for events to basically mean one thing. I was just curious in understanding how that vocabulary can function. So again, going back for maybe Jenkins is saying that's the case in my mind. So right now, there are a couple of different events. There's so much you can do inside of Jenkins. So when we have that vocabulary, I was wondering what it can look like. Someone is saying, I only want to trigger events of a certain type, which is defined by the vocabulary. I'm not sure if I'm thinking about it correctly.
Yeah, I think you make a definitely valid point, and it's something that we discussed before. So it's not the expectation that all the platform will have to produce all possible events. Rather, we want to have a common format for platforms who are able to deal with certain abstraction or concept to have a standard way of expressing that. Like, yeah, I was saying for Captain Freeze, sorry, for Tecton, Tecton really only has concept of task run, tasks and pipelines. So if you look into the protocol specification, sorry, we have in here, sorry, I went to the wrong folder again. Right, so we have different buckets of events, and core are things like pipeline run, queued, started, finished, task run, started, finished. And that might be what, as much as platforms like Tecton and perhaps Jenkins as well can produce. So if a platform deals with continuous deployment, then it will be able to produce continuous deployment type of events. And for the POC, in case of Tecton, I use this trick with a notation to express extra metadata and allow basically pipeline authors to send deployment type of events even through Tecton. And that's something that might be a valid approach for Jenkins as well. I'm not sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for showing it around. And we were talking about it earlier, and definitely something that's worth exploring and testing. And I'm sorry, my questions are all around, but I just had one question about the event or the Knative event broker. And so I'm wondering, how is it handling events? So it's like asynchronously, and also is there a way to basically like send events back if a network failure occurred, or just network failures or node failures in general? So how is it handling those sort of failures?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure what kind of retry capabilities that the triggers will provide. I need to check that. I mean, in terms of persistency for the events, you can have multiple implementation underneath. So you can, I think the default one is an in-memory queue that has that is set up, but you can have it running on top of other implementation like Kafka, for instance. But yeah, so I think because the events are stored into whatever underneath implementation you have, it should be possible to have retry mechanism in the triggers, but I'm not entirely sure. I need to check on that.
So just to follow up that, and it's totally okay if there isn't a very concrete answer to it, but anything that we're adding as a mechanism to ensure event delivery and also event persistence is not going to be a part of the events or the cloud events broker, but more so of the whole Knative serving in general, and adding on bits to it. For example, there can be as you said, like a Kafka, which is routing and also like persisting, or just other mechanisms apart from the cloud events broker, just sitting on top of it.
Right. Something that we discussed, and I think we would probably end up adding into the protocol, is the ability to kind of link sequence events between each other. So we have not discussed yet whether this is going to be a mandatory part of the protocol or not, but I think it would make very much sense. Also taking inspiration from what the Eiffel protocol does, to have a way for a receiver to know whether a certain event is part of a sequence of events. You know, if it's the first event, the last event, and so forth. Because then even if you get an event multiple times, or if you're missing some events, you have enough information to understand what's going on. And that's interesting both, I think, for the platform that is receiving event, if it's something like Captain or Tecton, but as well for those kind of bottom components. And if you have those kind of links, it makes it much easier to kind of build a nice visualization of what is going on.
Yes, that sounds very interesting. Yes, and that was another thing that is something that we are thinking, like talking about, is just what happens when events are emitted in a sequence, or so something happened in Tecton and then we want to do something in Captain and then send that back, and then there's multiple like sequences. So just making sure that the triggers are set on it correctly, and the filtering and everything. So yes, thank you again for the explanation. That makes sense.
All right. No, thanks for all the questions. And so on Jenkins side, I know there was a discussion during the Jenkins meetup after CDCon about cloud event support, I think, if I'm not mistaken, but I could not attend that. But is there any regular meeting you have to discuss this work on cloud events, or anywhere it would make sense to follow the conversation?
Yes, we do have a meeting. So it's this time. So the meeting this time, we just do it an hour earlier. So this meeting was at 3 p.m. UTC, and we do it every Monday at 2 p.m. UTC. And we also do have, so this is about projects. We also created a channel for GSOC cloud events. I'll copy the name of the channel. I'm not sure how I can.
It's in the CDCon, sorry, in the CDF Slack, right?
Yes, Kara posted it in the chat. Thank you, Kara. The channel name for CDF Slack Jenkins Cloud Events plugin.
Oh, perfect. Thanks.
We also have demos for like the first phase demo. So the first phase was developing Jenkins as a source, and now we're moving on to Jenkins as a sink. So we do have a bit of demo for Jenkins as a source itself tomorrow at I think it's at 1 p.m. Yes, it's at 1 p.m. UTC. Again, if that's something that the community is interested in, wants to join, can also send a link to that.
Yes, please share a link.
You got the link from Kara in the chat.
Thank you. Perfect. And I mean, if you at some point have a demo that you or presentation that you think you would like to share into this working group, just let us know, and you're welcome also to come to this working group and make a demo here if you'd like to.
Yes, that sounds amazing. We're running short of time, but we can do it the next meeting that we have in August. That'd be really exciting.
Great. So I think the next meeting will be in August, but I'm not sure. Right. So if I'm not mistaken, it would be August the 16th.
That sounds familiar, I think.
Okay, great. So I won't be into this meeting, but Emil will. So if you would like to do a presentation in August.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And at that point, we will have more working example of Jenkins as these things. So right now, it's mostly just thinking about the event architecture and the pipeline for this. But at that point, we should have something that's working, hopefully.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so thanks for that. I put a note here in the list of presentation for August 16th. And yeah, so once we prepare the agenda for the next meeting, I'll add it to the list of the presentations, and feel free to add more information or reschedule if the date doesn't work anymore.
Thank you. Sounds good.
All right. Anything else on the workstream updates? I think there's something I wanted to mention. We had a discussion. We started a discussion during the last vocabulary updates meeting last Tuesday about where is the right home for the our vocabulary specification and any software artifact that comes along with it, like SDKs and so forth. Whether we should have an open source project independent from the CDF with its own governance. And yeah, so Alois raised this point. And yeah, so that's, I think, something that from my point of view would be interesting to have on the, I don't know, I want to say medium term or long term or even short term, but I think we discussed that the focus for now would be on the POC and getting really started with a protocol that or a specification that is useful to solve some real use cases. And I think once we have a name, so we set ourselves a deadline for, or at least a tentative date for October for deciding on a name. And I think once we have a name for our specification, we will be able to start doing things like creating a GitHub organization if you want to, or buying a domain name. And then eventually we could start to move some of the software artifacts into that space. Okay, anything else? I hope I represented this correctly.
I think so. when you're writing, we talked about, for example, looking at the cloud events, how they have a repo for, or I think it was organization for cloud events, and then they have the specification is one repo, and then all the different SKs is another repo. And I guess that's good, because then if you're doing a pull request on the SDK, it's not in the same repo as specification. So I think that's probably a good idea to have to separate them in different repos.
Indeed, thanks. I agree. All right, any more updates on the work stream? No? Anything for meetups and conferences?
How's your presentation going?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same thing.
Right. So Mauricio and myself, we are working on a presentation. It's almost finished. So for DevOps Word, because we have the recording is scheduled on Wednesday, and I think the essence of the presentation is to kind of demonstrate a real life kind of problem that we want to solve by combining different platforms like Tecton and Captain, and then introducing the SIG events, introducing the CDF, giving some background on the different projects, and then a good part of the presentation itself would be running the demo and running through like the diagram that I've shown you and explaining what's going on, and then showing the demo live. Does that answer the question?
For my part, at least.
Okay. All right. We don't have anything here for blog post to share. And so I think this takes us to the PR design discussion. Just open it. Do you want to?
Yes, so basically me and, well, this is actually, to start with, it was based on a comment you did, Andrea, but then it was a discussion between me and, I completely lost your name, Matthias. Yeah, so there's a pull request up to do the renaming, and yeah, basically we're renaming change to change proposal. Because that's in some sense what it is. And my question is, so right now in the terminology, so there's like a change proposal created, change proposal reviewed, blah, 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 blah. But then when it comes to the merge, I had an internal discussion with myself earlier, and my current proposal is to actually start referring to it as a change when it gets merged, because that's when the code actually changes. But it might be that for consistency's sake, we should just refer to it as a change proposal, because it is in some sense also the change proposal that gets merged. And I was just wondering if anyone has any input on that.
So then it would be like change proposal created, change proposal, change proposal, and bond, and And in your case, the change proposal merged, or else you would actually have changed merged event. So you don't have proposal in the last step, basically.
Exactly. But I don't have a strong opinion. It was just a gut feeling here.
I would say keep consistency. I do understand your idea, but maybe people, if they're looking for a proposal and they don't have the last one, they will miss it out. But that's in my head.
I think that's
if you get
very,
what I'm thinking.
Yeah. I mean, consistency is also very important. So maybe consistency wins over like philosophical correctness in this case. Or actually, it would still be correct. It's just different. But I will, if no one is against it, I will go ahead and update it to say change proposal merged instead. And of course, whatever comments anyone has are more than welcome. I think there is more work to be done here.
Can I add a remark? I'm not part of the regular attendance, but maybe I can provide some feedback from Red Hat. I'm working at Red Hat.
Yes, please.
So we use multiple. I don't know if that is the case. So maybe as I said, maybe I'm trying to open a closed door or vice versa. If we are trying to find the proper naming for PR, but more generic one, we at Red Hat we name it code contribution, because we are working with GitHub and GitLab and Git and other Git services. Does that make sense?
I mean, that's also an alternative name. I think Matthias was the one who proposed the term proposal, and I sort of like to have that word because it means that it doesn't actually become anything until it's approved. A code contribution is a contribution whether or not it's approved or not, so to say. I mean, I can presumably contribute code directly to the main branch if I wanted to, but a proposal implies in some sense that it needs to be looked at and it needs to be approved by someone.
I agree, but no, like there will be, not sure if, like the ecosystem will know what the change proposal is until you explain it explicitly.
Yeah, that's also a good point. So we initially had change, but that's like stolen directly from Gerrit, and not everyone uses Gerrit.
Right.
So, but I think you bring up a good point, and we need to keep that in mind for a lot of things, like what is the least strange name we can choose, because we're not going to find a name that everyone agrees is the perfect name for it, but finding somehow the principle of least surprise or something like that would be nice.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, I think it's going to be difficult to not surprise someone, and you can think about ways you can view it in different ways, and I guess it gets into the philosophical territory. Yeah, but I think we had document at some point where we track the different terminology from the different projects or communities.
I think we did that. Should we, or was that the SIG interrupt? Is that what you're thinking about? The Rosetta Stone?
Yes. Vocabulary.
Could be. But maybe we should bring into this one, because it could be nice to have at least a reference to that one, or to see it when you're reading it. I'm not 100% sure that was certain, but I think the Rosetta Stone has that type of comparison, what the different call it.
Yes, I don't think this is the right document. I wanted to check if we had these terminology about code contribution tracked in there. It would be good.
Is it, let's see, I posted a link in the chat now. Is it this one you're looking for?
All right. Yeah, I think this is the one.
And it's further down, almost it's last table.
Right. Okay, so this is from the SIG interoperability. Yeah, that's why I couldn't find it.
Spontaneous thought. To me, the word proposal and the word request are pretty interchangeable. Maybe it would be better to call it a change request. No, that collides with other terminology. I know in Ericsson, you have a different meaning for a change request. I think that's basically a feature request, right?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But here, I mean, you have pull request, merge request, change request. Yeah. You could think about code contribution proposal or code contribution request. So, yeah.
Becomes rather verbose though.
Yeah, it does. We have to think of that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you could also say that if someone makes a pull request or a change request, I mean the code is contributed. It's not merged into the branch where you're trying to merge it, but it is available for anyone to see and use if they want to. So in a way, it is already a contribution. So I think I can see the value behind that terminology as well. But I think at least it might be good to track that naming into this table. Was it, sorry, Leora is? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly.
Leora, yes.
Yes. I don't know, maybe you could contribute the terminology into this page. Sure. If you have terminology in general, not only for the change that you're using as a community, maybe it makes sense to track it here, because then we have more.
Can you just explain to me a little bit about this page and where are you expecting me to contribute my additions?
Yes. So this is the
interoperability SIG?
SIG, yes.
Okay.
So, and I think yeah, need to check FATI, but I think a PR would be the right way to contribute to it. Oops, I just realized we're quite over time.
Do you want to continue the discussion over Stack?
Yes, but I think if you make a PR to this repo, it would be the right way.
Yeah, but what are you expecting me to change? Which just can you show me again which file you showed before so I can go and review it?
It's the one I linked in the chat.
Okay, great. So I'll use that link. Thank you.
If you would like to, you don't have to do it. But we're trying to capture there as many as possible, I think. So I thought it might be good.
I will take a look, and if I have something meaningful to contribute, I will submit an open API.
Thanks a lot, and
Sure.
yeah, thanks for joining today as well.
Thank you, and again, please do share in the YouTube the recording, because most of the meeting I didn't hear you very well, and I do want to hear
Sure.
everything that was said, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll upload the meeting as the recording as soon as it's available, and it will be then in the playlist on the CD Foundation site, YouTube site.
Somebody shared, yeah, somebody already, I don't recall the name, I'm sorry about that, but somebody already shared with me the playlist, the CDF SIG Events playlist.
Yeah, I did that.
Thank you, appreciate that.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining today, and have a great rest of your day. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Everyone.